put you in here. Good evening and welcome. After a week hiatus, this is the Commander's Gridiron back once again, and I'm your host, Steve Lockman, where we talk about everything on the field, off the field, Commanders football related. And of course, being off 1 week and going 2 weeks in a row here now, there's no shortage of things to talk about. We have an up and a down week as we took the loss against the Bears, which we're going to talk about here in a brief minute, and rebounded with a win against the Atlanta Falcons this past Sunday. But first, as we always do, we try to talk and start off the show with some off the field news. And I kind of lump this topic together just all together as one in terms of owners news, because it kind of affects about four different owners, principally, Josh Harris and company, but a lot of the other ones are actually involved in this week's topic as well. But we're going to start with Josh Harris. And one of the things that was pretty interesting from Josh Harris that came out 2 weeks ago after the drubbing that we took on primetime TV to the Chicago Bears, where we gave them their only victory of the season so far in week 5, there was a report coming out of the Washington Post that Josh Harris made the comment that he was overly concerned about ticket sales moving forward for home games after the loss to the Chicago Bears. And this kind of struck me as interesting, right? That predominantly, too many owners don't, other than Jerry Jones in Dallas, don't come out publicly middle to beginning of the season, talk about their team, talk about the fan attendance or revenues or anything like that. So I don't want to say it was concerning, but it was definitely kind of borderline alarming that Josh Harris comes out and says this when it's only week 5. Now, keep in mind that did put us 2-3 after we played the Chicago Bears and lost 40-20. However, so far under the new ownership group, they've been able to sell out every home game. And they've been able to give, better amenities at FedEx Field, which is a complete dump. And we've addressed that in previous episodes here already this year at Commander's Gridiron. And, it was just something that, even though it was said and it was posted and it blew up all over DC media, just something that is interesting, knowing that the owners already have their eye on the perception of the team's performance along with attendance and how they correlate each other, right? So it's just definitely something to watch. Our next game is away against the New York Giants. However, when we make that next return home game, it'll be interesting to see what happens and kind of the response of the fans moving forward and whether or not that premonition of Josh Harris comes to fruition. Second owner news that was kind of interesting. As we all know, the Commanders are starting the process of looking for designing in their head the thoughts and processes of building a new stadium. And one of the things that I found interesting on somebody's X page somewhere this past weekend, I forget who it was that minority owners Mark Ein and Mitchell Rales is actually leading the stadium charge among the new ownership group. We're taking a tour of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which is the new dome stadium of the Atlanta Falcons. I think it's only like 3 years old, give or take. Pretty phenomenal field, pretty awesome fan experience, great amenities, brand new stadium, the whole 9 yards. And, this was something that, is very refreshing, very positive to see, that ownership is taking time out of the busy schedule, especially on game day, to go tour other stadiums, see ideas, see what's out there, see what works, see what doesn't, see what gets the fans excited, see what the fans give the finger to as far as a game day experience. And hopefully they can use all this information to kind of pour into the overall grand design and scheme of what they want their new stadium to be like here in DC and what they want that fan experience to be, most importantly, right? So I kind of found that really interesting. And I hope that as they go through other away games this year, that, it's going to be something that the owners can do for, the owners can do moving forward. So, we got a vocal one here. But it's something that, as each away game they go to, they can take that tour, they can get those notes, they can look at the stadiums, and there's a lot of great stadiums on our away schedule, not only this year but next year as well. As much as we hate to say it, and I know Paul and Dave, if they're watching, they'll probably jump in. As much as we hate the Dallas Cowboys, Jerry World is an awesome stadium. I've had a chance to be there myself on a Monday night primetime game when the Cowboys played the Redskins years ago, and it was one of the better fan experiences that I had on an away game visit. So even though, yes, we're big rivals and we hate Dallas, Dallas hates us, there's definitely a lot of things that can be learned from the Dallas stadium, that they could possibly incorporate into the stadium here in DC area. Third, and kind of the more, bigger pressing issue, and actually before I hit the pressing issue, is Paul from them 215 boys on Wednesday night says, Mercedes-Benz Stadium is beautiful, and I've never been there, but from what I see and read, it absolutely is, right? And do I want a dome? I think I'd say yes to a dome. I love the outdoor atmosphere of football stadiums, played under the open air, let the weather be what it is for the games. However, if you want to host the big game, the Super Bowl, concerts and events throughout the winter and springtime and the rainy season, you're going to have to go a dome. So, it's definitely something that, looking further down the road here, in order to get the bigger events and the bigger pool for your stadium, you're going to have to make it a dome. Majority of the time, just leave the roof open, let it is what it is. But, you're going to have to pay the extra money to make it retract and cover itself up. So last but not least, one of the things that I found super interesting was after the Chicago loss, it was the primetime Thursday night game, Magic Johnson came out, pretty harsh criticism of the football team, their approach to the game, their lackluster effort. I think his quote to some extent was something to the effect of they didn't have any heart coming out of the locker room and were outcoached and outplayed, right? And it got me thinking that there's a couple select owners in the NFL, Jerry Jones, Jim Irsay, and maybe one or two others that come to mind, but you don't see NFL owners coming out and publicly speaking about the performance of their team. I think kind of the caveat to that, and you guys out there in NFL world and those watching the show tonight can chime in, that, unless you're on a super losing streak, kind of like 0-16, like the Detroit Lions of yesteryear, that the owners don't really come out into the press or the media and talk about their team. Like I said, other than the exceptions of maybe Jerry Jones, Jim Irsay, Kraft from New England on occasion, but that was usually, because they were winning so many freaking Super Bowls, whatever. But, it's just something that you don't see. So then the question begs that, what's the overall angle of Magic Johnson here, right? Is he trying to motivate his team? Is he trying to establish himself as one of the, solid minority owners here of the Commanders? Is he, just trying to motivate the players because they had a really bad loss? Is there something else that's driving his motivation to make those comments in the DC market? Because we know as soon as he makes those comments, not only is it going to be in the DC market, but it's going national, right? It's because of who he is and where he is. And as Paul says, he's got Jerry doing that all the time. Hey man, just sign the checks. He's all about the PR and the ticket sales, right? You're absolutely right that, Jerry does what Jerry does and Jerry gets the ratings for it. And, whether you like it or not, and whether you like the team or not, it keeps them relevant in the national conversation all the time because of something going on down there in Arlington, Texas, with the Dallas Cowboys, right? So, it's just it's just something interesting to note that moving forward, to see how much Magic Johnson becomes involved in the team, or is he just kind of the celebrity cheerleader, so to speak, or something like that that happens from week to week as things go on. So as we move on, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time about it because it is what it is, and it happened. But 2 weeks ago, Washington showed up primetime Thursday night game and took an absolute drubbing to the winless Bears, 40-20. And let's be honest, I kind of, while I was hoping that the Commanders would win this game, I also knew that this would be the trap game because we don't do very well against winless teams, right? So it's something that, we knew going in would definitely be a challenge and definitely be a obstacle to us on Thursday night prime time, right? So it's something that, we're going to hang on just a quick second because the dogs are barking. So hopefully the dogs will stop barking here. Somebody's at the door. So doing what they do best, and that's guard the house, right? So anyhow, the Washington Commanders went in, laid an egg, and actually fell behind 23-0 at halftime or something crazy like that. 27-3 at halftime, actually. And basically we made the Chicago Bears look like absolute studs. And now, granted, they got some good players on their team, but we made basically their entire offense look like perennial Pro Bowlers. And, when the offense doesn't get consistently started in the first half and can only muster 3 points by a field goal late in the second half, or in the second quarter, and in the first half, we make Justin Fields and DJ Moore look like the premier NFL quarterback wide receiver combo, and the defense just gives up humongous play after humongous play, then we're going to dig ourselves a hole that can never be dug out of. And when you go looking at 27-3 at the half and figuring out what kind of adjustments you need to make in the second half, it's pretty much a hole that's too big to be dug out of. And, as Out of the Box Sports Entertainment says, he's absolutely right. On the NFC East War Room, just prior to the Thursday night primetime game with the Bears, Stacy from the Big Blue Power Hour said, she's going to win it. The Bears were going to win it for the Dick Butkus because, unfortunately, Dick Butkus passed away earlier the day before. And, whether there's any truth to the reason why they play up or why they have needed extra motivation, that was certainly there for them. But one of the things, and EB was good at it, the offense came out firing in the second half, actually outscored the Bears in the second half 17-13, but the hole in the first half proved to be too much and we lost 40-20. Sam Howell didn't have a terrible game. He went 37 for 51 for 388 yards, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. But when you let Justin Fields go 15 for 29 for 282 yards and 4 touchdowns, it's going to be a long night. And it was definitely a long night for the secondary because DJ Moore just lit us up against the rookie Emmanuel Forbes, who we're going to talk about here in a couple of minutes. And he had 8 receptions for 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. And it was just a long night overall. I did stay up and watch the entire game, but it was just something that I was like shaking my head with. And, as Paul says, we couldn't stop DJ Moore that night. And, they watched the film that they needed to and exploited the things that they needed to. And even though predominantly it was majority on the rookie cornerback from Mississippi State, the whole defense needed to play 10 times better than what they did and they looked like absolute garbage, a flaming dumpster fire, really. And it kind of didn't bode well because it was a long week and gave the DC market and sports media, along with the national market as well, a lot to talk about for 3 extra days on top of a typical regular Sunday afternoon loss. So then what happens next? Well, because of last week's hiatus for us on the show, as some of you know or may not know, following my social media on X or Facebook, there's a local radio show or a local radio station called Big 100 out of DC, and once a month they do a overtime with Coach Ron Rivera radio show that was hosted over in Ashburn at DC Prime Steaks in Ashburn, Virginia, just up the street from the training facility. And I had the fortunate opportunity to attend that, but unfortunately it was the same night as the Commanders' GridIron. So we kind of took the week hiatus, went to hear what Coach Rivera had to say. And, obviously a lot of the questions are scripted. Some of the answers are kind of what you expect from a head coach of an NFL football team. They're not really, I don't want to say 100% truthful, but he kind of tells you what you want to hear and answers them the way that you expect the head coach to answer them. But then there was also some questions that, you could tell that Coach Rivera was very honest about, very open and upfront, and kind of, took away the aspect of, look, it's not a room full of reporters, it's a room full of fans, business people, etc. And, I'm just going to talk to you one-on-one. And, a couple of the things that I took out of that I thought were kind of eye-opening and kind of grabbed my attention. There was a couple. One, he talked about Emmanuel Forbes and the hard week. Actually, I should say the hard weeks that he had, not only against Chicago, but against the Eagles and A.J. Brown, where he gave up a bunch of big plays and a bunch of yards. And then even going back to the Buffalo game, when he was predominantly covering Stephon Diggs, and then they made some adjustments to get him off of that. But, he talked about the resilience that the young man had and the fact that, they benched him in the second half of the Bears game, it would have been a benching in the second half of the Bears game. And, he compared, one of the questions that was asked of him was, how is it compared being a rookie now to when he was playing as a linebacker with the Bears? And he said, it's absolutely different now. Not only just the era of football, but everything is watched on a microscope and everything is judged on a microscope. Coach Rivera made the comment, I could have a bad game and I'd hear about it from my immediate market in Chicago, or you'd read about it in the newspaper the next day. He goes, these young kids, especially Emmanuel Forbes, has a bad game, and literally one play after he gives up a big play or makes a mistake or, gives up a long touchdown or something, like it's all over social media. And I wholeheartedly don't condone this or agree with it. But the poor kid who's probably 22, 23 years old out of Mississippi State, not only was getting criticized and chastised on social media, Facebook, X, the whole 9 yards, the young man was even receiving death threats for him and his family, which is like way beyond anything remotely acceptable, right? So, of course, not only is he going to read this stuff, his family's going to read that stuff. And, so not only do you take the mental aspect of having a bad performance 2 weeks in a row, sometimes you could even say 3 weeks in a row, but then, having to deal with everything that's on social media about you, your performance, how you let the defense down, how you let the team down, and basically that all culminated into a loss for the Washington Commanders. So, there's a lot of talk about, hey, we're just going to give them a break. We're going to give them a time to regroup. And, we're going to go see what happens. And it was interesting because there was an article in the Washington Post subsequently that moving forward to this past week's game against the Falcons, Emmanuel Forbes was actually benched for the entire game, which was actually a complete surprise because we didn't expect him to start in the Atlanta Falcons game, but we also expected him to pick up a couple snaps somewhere in the game. And, I was talking to a friend today about it, and one of the things we were talking about was it'd be interesting to see the pressers because of why they benched him in that game. And according to, where the coaches were how, I won't say political, but how politically correct they may be, and why they're going to give true answers to what they do and what they don't do. Was, hey, look, we talked to him, we told him he needed to reset. They thought the reset and learning experience from watching from a different perspective was an entire game of watching from the sidelines. I don't know if that was 100% correct, but it kind of is what it is. Hopefully they're not setting the young man up for failure. So we'll kind of see what happens, right? And as Paul says, the question I would have asked is, where's the running game, right? The O-line issues. And trust me, one of the questions that night at overtime with Coach Ron was about the offensive line and basically why we were leading the NFL in sacks with Sam Howell. I think, well, shit, now even after the Atlanta game, we're up to like 29. I think we're just under 30. But, even after the Chicago game, we were at 24. And the interesting thing was, his big moniker is we'll go back, we'll watch the film, we'll learn from it, we'll make the adjustments. And some of the things that helped from the Philadelphia game to the Bears game was, they were making some offensive line adjustments here and there because there weren't as many sacks. Sam Howell was getting the ball out a little bit quicker, not as fast as what he was against Philly. And, there are definitely some changes that I think needed to be made, but nobody wants to take the accountability to make those. So then we fast forward to this past weekend. Washington Commanders went down and visited the Atlanta Falcons at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and it wasn't pretty, but we pulled out the dub 24-16. And it was fairly consistent for us, other than the fourth quarter, that we had scoring in all of the first three quarters. And, basically, as we kind of look at it, that, we started off the game good, took the opening drive down. Joey Sly kicked a 37-yard field goal. Lo and behold, swap possessions a little bit. And then about 2 minutes left in the first quarter, Kyle Pitts has finally got involved in the Atlanta Falcons offense. And I kind of was wondering when this young stud was going to get started and kind of show, what Kyle Pitts can do. And they kind of started utilizing him. Now, whether that was part of their game plan or they're just taking what we were giving them as far as what our defensive looks were doing. Kyle Pitts caught a 9-yard touchdown pass from Ritter. And, now we're down 7-3, but we got points on the board. The gap's only 4, so nothing to really fear yet. And second quarter, we turned around. Antonio Gibson had a 1-yard touchdown pass from Sam Howell. After an impressive drive down the field, took a bunch of plays, took a lot of time off, and, gave us that 10-7 lead. Then we turned around after a short field and a turnover. Curtis Samuel had a 7-yard touchdown pass from Sam Howell. Wow, it's 17-7. Could this be the turnaround that we need? Yes, I get it. It's only the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons suck this year. But, in the grand scheme of things, we need good drives. We need good scores. We need good energy. We need, that momentum to keep going, regardless of the quality of team that you're playing, right? But lo and behold, right before the half, Atlanta turns around and kicks a 47-yard field goal to make it 17-10 going into the half. Second half, Falcons start off with the ball, turned it over on the initial play, on the initial drive. And then as a result of that, a couple plays later on a short field drive, Brian Robinson rumbled and stumbled for a 24-yard touchdown run to make it 24-10. This is where we kind of get uncomfortable, right? Because Washington is never really good at protecting leads. And for whatever reason, my biggest argument with Jack Del Rio, and you'll hear me say the good stuff on this show as well as the bad. And here's one of the bads, right? He has the ability to turn ourselves into a top 10 defense every year. But when he gets a lead, he plays too conservative to protect that lead. And what I mean by this is that we were fairly aggressive and had a decent pass rush throughout the entire game to get us to where we were. But then what does he do? He stops rushing people. He stops running the stunts. He stops running the crosses. He stops blitzing guys, goes into a prevent defense. And I am a firm believer that the only thing a prevent does is prevent you from winning the game. So as luck would have it, Atlanta goes down the field, scores another touchdown, makes it 24-16. And, Atlanta definitely had their opportunity to drive again for another touchdown. And luckily, Jamin Davis picked it off with a good pass rush from Chase Young to force the interception, and then basically allow us to keep the ball as we basically end up the game, winning 24-16. But as we look at the Atlanta game, some of the things to look at, and it kind of happens to us that, we look at turnovers, right? And, Desmond Ridder put up some good numbers. He was 28 for 47, 307 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 3 interceptions. Where I'm concerned at is 192-yard total offense. Absolutely, Paul. One of the biggest things, and we thought we were going to get better, and, I take it with a grain of salt because we are only a third of the way through the NFL season with 6 games down out of the 18-game week where we play 17 games. But you would expect us to have a lot more balanced offense with EB coming in. A lot of disgruntled fans were drawing correlations from this game specifically to the run and play balance / play calling selection of Scott Turner, who we just canned after 3 vanilla years in DC. So I would definitely like to try and stick with the run game. It was interesting that when we brought in Chris Rodriguez late in basically like in the fourth quarter, late in the game, that, the kid was running at 5-6 yards a clip, I think with a 5.8 yard average. And, did a really good job running north and south, kind of gave us that extra little spark we needed. Why didn't we keep doing that? We know that our offensive line is terrible at pass blocking, but really good at run blocking, especially according to Pro Football Focus. Excuse me. So, why we kind of abandoned the run game, I'm not exactly sure. I think that in order to win next week, which we're going to take a look at here in a little bit, that we're going to need to get back to that balanced offense or even maybe go more run heavy. But as we kind of look at it, we held Atlanta to leading rusher, which was Al Geyer, to 13 carries, 51 yards. Drake London led their receiving corps with 9 receptions, 125 yards. We seem to be really good at giving opposing teams star wide receivers over 100 yards reception. We gave London 125. Last week we gave DJ Moore like 200, 190. I don't know. It was way up there. Week before that, as Jason Kelsey calls him Swole Batman, A.J. Brown torched us for, I think it was like 9 receptions and like 190 yards, 180 yards, something like that. And, so obviously right now our biggest weakness is the secondary. And it'll be interesting to see how they respond going into next week with a divisional game. But leading the way for the Commanders against the Atlanta Falcons, Brian Robinson had 10 carries at 31 yards. And Terry McLaurin, although he didn't have any touchdowns, had some really awesome and critical catches, 6 of those receptions for 81 yards. But, as I scrolled through the stat board and the leaderboard to kind of figure out, who the player of the week is going to be, this week's Monkey Coffee player of the game, I was looking here, looking there, looking high, looked on defense, looked on special teams at Jamison Crowder after his, amazing punt return to set up the short field for the go-ahead touchdown. I brought it back to Sam Howell, who went 14 for 23, 151 yards, 3 touchdowns, and once again, 0 interceptions. And I think that's the big part is, as much as our offensive line sucks and they don't know, they're blocked from a hole in the ground and can't protect a high school JV football team from rushing Sam Howell because we do lead the NFL in sacks at 29. I got to give this kid a ton of credit, right? And one of the things that you got to look at is, Sam Howell at QB1 versus the amount of sacks that he's taken. Like I said, we've got 29 so far this year, and how many hurries and rushes and everything else. That as Nick from the Washington Post said, you can't know until you truly give him all the pieces that he needs. So we know we got some really skilled players on offense between our wide receivers and running back. and even a good tight end in Logan Thomas when he's healthy. But the line isn't anywhere close to what it was 3 years ago when it was pretty solid for Alex Smith and even Taylor Heineke, in that little span. But until they really invest in upfront, which they should have did in this year's draft and even better in free agency, which they didn't, I don't think you're really going to know whether it's going to be a protection issue and a team issue or whether it's a Sam Howell issue in the amount of sacks. But this is the second straight week that Sam Howell has thrown 0 interceptions. So I'm definitely going to give him credit for that. 151 yards. I'd love to see more yards, but he makes it where it counts. He had 3 touchdowns. I'd love to see it over 200, even pushing that 300-yard mark, but he only had 23 pass attempts. So I can't really fault him too much for that. However, one of the things that does make him this week's Monkey Cult Coffee Player of the Week is actually, and I'm all full of useless stats and useless Jeopardy knowledge, but Sam Howell currently has more after week 6 in the NFL. Sam Howell currently has more completions at 145 than Tua out of Miami and Jared Goff, who's leading the charge up there in Detroit for the Lions. He has more passing yards, 1,500, than Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars and Joe Burrow, who's currently stinking it up in Cincinnati with the Bengals, who are both, by the way, first overall picks in their respective draft classes. Sam Howell has more passing touchdowns, number 9, than Jalen Hurts and Matthew Stafford. Now, I'll give him credit. Hurts is finally kind of starting to figure out what things are in Philly and, kind of figuring out that identity of the way they were last year. So I don't think it's going to be too long until Hurts passes Howell, but, it's good to note where it is. He does have a better passer rating than every other quarterback in his draft class, except for Brock Purdy from the San Francisco 49ers at 90.1. So, Sam is definitely starting to put up the stats that you'd like to see. The problem is what our defense can do to kind of help him out in not giving up so many points a game, right? We've been averaging over 24 points a game. The problem is the defense has been giving up over 30 points a game. So, I just happened to look at it and, we lead the league and now after the Atlanta game, we're now up to 34 sacks for the season, but it's definitely something to think that, if this kid can definitely get better, then, it'll be interesting to see what he can do. Is he our long-term answer? So, I really think that, looking from top to bottom of the roster, I looked at Kendall Fuller, who had the interception, led the team in tackles this past week, but, when I came back to it, the Monkey Cult Coffee Player of the Week is going to be Sam Howell. And as Paul says, I like watching Cody Barton play. 11 tackles, right? Five solos, 1 tackle for loss. He actually did really well this past week. He's kind of been getting torched every now and then, especially trying to play coverage against good tight ends or a slot receiver. One of the things that definitely could have changed the game, and it kind of definitely changed the momentum and a possible scoring opportunity, which gave him great field position, Atlanta that is, was there's a complete bullshit roughing the passer call on Barton that was a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down that basically extended the Atlanta Falcons drive because it was like 3rd and 14 or something crazy like that, maybe even longer. But Cody Barton was coming in to rush Desmond Ridder, and he actually jumped up with his hands up to block the pass that Ridder was throwing. And as he comes down, his arms come down and his right arm actually hits Ridder in the side of the shoulder pad, in the neck area against the helmet. So it kind of touched his helmet, but didn't really touch it. And as Paul says, it was a total BS call, right? Absolutely. And I feel that I felt really angry during the game seeing that bullshit call. But then, as I kind of watched some of the other games this past Sunday and even Sunday night's game and watched the same bullshit call get called 2 or 3 more times across the league, I didn't necessarily feel so bad, right? And by the way, Washington squeaked out the win, so it kind of is what it is. And, I can handle taking the bullshit flag. If we would have lost again, then I'd probably be equally upset. But, it kind of is what it is, right? So as we look ahead next Sunday, we get to travel to MetLife Stadium and face off against the New York Giants. Now, one of the things that, I always talk about is divisional games are always so hard to play. Whether we're playing the Eagles, whether we're playing the Cowboys, or whether we're playing the Giants. As I was talking to Paul right before the show tonight, that we were talking about, well, how are they gonna do against the Giants? And the Giants are always formidably tough against the Washington Commanders. I mean, hell, we tied them last year in one game out of our two, and ultimately that was a deciding factor, along with a non-PI call that kept us out of the playoffs from going into a wild card spot. But I looked at this past Sunday's game, and the Giants played the Buffalo Bills, and we got absolutely stomped 37-3 by the Buffalo Bills in week 3. And the New York Giants, who were 1-4 going into the game on Sunday, now 1-5, put up a really good fight against the Buffalo Bills and lost 14-9. So, then the questions start kind of running in my head. Was Buffalo just having an off week? Did Buffalo have injuries? Was New York really that good? Yada, 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 yada. And, I think just having that like interstate rivalry between technically they're from New Jersey, but between the Giants and the Bills, is always one of the harder games for those guys outside of the NFC East division. So, they definitely held Buffalo scoreless for the first 3 quarters, because Buffalo didn't even get on the board until halfway through the fourth quarter, a third of the way through the fourth quarter. And it was super interesting that they played a really good game. They had Saquon Barkley back. They had Waller at tight end back. They were still missing 1 or 2 key offensive linemen, but overall they didn't do bad. So, it kind of gives me an outlook for this Sunday's game that, what is Washington going to do against the Giants this week? And one of the things that kind of draws my attention is obviously our secondary. Is Danny Johnson going to keep playing? Are they going to go back to Emmanuel Forbes? Hopefully, somewhat. Is Forbes not going to start, but then get seeing playing time? What is our defense going to look like? The front 4, I'm not necessarily worried about. They got a good rush. They got some good sacks last week. They got a couple batted balls. They were able to cause disruption that led to interceptions against the Falcons. We know that the Giants aren't the Falcons. I think even though records don't necessarily look good, I would like to say, and Dan, one of our hosts from the Big Blue Power Hour, would probably jump for joy when I say this, that the Giants are better than the Falcons, and the Giants did really well against the Buffalo Bills, and we didn't do very well against the Buffalo Bills. So I see the Giants being a pretty good opponent to us. Even though Danny Dimes probably isn't going to be playing another week because of his neck injury, Tyrod Taylor's not doing a bad job. And I saw that they were actually working out, I forget who it was, another quarterback yesterday or today in New York to back up Tyrod. But, Tyrod did what Tyrod needed to do. And Tyrod is another example of a quarterback that gives us problems in mobility, right? He's not the prolific elite NFL passer. He's not the prolific rusher in a quarterback. He's a good hybrid of the two. And that causes problems when we have mobile quarterbacks against our defense. It's always been one of our Achilles heels. Whether it's Jalen Hurts from Philly, whether it's Josh Allen from Buffalo, Russell Wilson from the Broncos, even Josh Dobbs started lighting us up week 1 against Arizona. So I wouldn't be surprised if Taylor is able to use his legs to his advantage on Sunday afternoon to extend a couple plays, get a couple first downs, keep the ball moving, and kind of do what the Giants need to do. What scares me the most is 2 things. It's called Barkley and Waller. They brought Waller in the offseason for a reason, because they needed to bolster the tight end position. If Waller can be healthy or even improve on his injuries from 2 weeks ago is, what Waller is going to do to us and how they utilize him. I absolutely agree with what Paul says, and that the concern is in the middle of the field. My linebacker on Waller. Jamin Davis is not an elite linebacker. Jamin Davis is a good to above average linebacker, right? But he still has trouble covering in the pass. He's a decent run stopper, but nothing to really write home about. And we definitely see the progression year after year and even game after game in Jamin Davis. And even towards the end of the game last week against Atlanta, he started to do really well. Hence, even getting the last, interception of the game to kind of seal the victory for Washington. Then we have Cody Barton, who's the, 14-year, 12-year seasoned vet, that played all of his time, or majority of it, out in Seattle with the Legion of Doom on that great defense. And he brings a lot of experience, decent run stopper, but he's kind of average in pass coverage as well. So then the question becomes, do you take one of the nickel backs, whether it's a safety or the nickel back itself, that they predominantly run, and use that to cover Waller? Do you kind of chip double team / kind of just throw off Waller with a combination of other defensive players? Like, what's your game plan? What's your angle, right? And I'm going to tell you right now, whether Danny Dimes is behind center, Tyrod Taylor, or, Joe Blow off the street, if we don't come up with a plan to, I don't want to say eliminate Waller, but kind of make him less relevant, he's going to be a big thorn in our side for the entire afternoon. Number 2, Saquon Barkley looks like he's starting to heal from his ankle injury. And even though he definitely had some kind of, a little bit of a lingering limp and wasn't able to make clean, solid cuts upfield, sideways, or whatever this past Sunday against the Buffalo Bills, Saquon Barkley was still Saquon Barkley. And when you have legs that are the size of freight trains and a determination to not go down at any cost of the imagination, it spells disaster, right? So I think that in order for us to even have a remote chance of winning this game, we're going to have to limit the rushing. And I would be super happy and tickled pink if it was under 100 yards, but I don't see that happening. So I'm going to say if we can keep the Giants to 150 yards or less total in rushing, then it definitely gives us a free chance. And as Dave chimes in, the other host of them 215 Boys on Wednesday nights, along with Paul, what's going on, Commander Man? Hey, it's nice to see we both got the dubs this week. Even though, I'll be honest, I was hoping for Los Angeles Chargers to pull it out, but it is what it is. There you go. Out of the Box Sports says that the Giants were working out Matt Barkley and Ian Book this week. Barkley, the journeyman, Book as well. And when you get to that level of quarterback, it's kind of like, hey, just sign somebody, throw them in, plug them in, see what happens, right? It's kind of like when Baker Mayfield last season got signed by the Rams for 2 days, shows up on Thursday night and leads them to victory, right? Hopefully the Giants don't do that this week to us. But back to the preview. I think for the Giants, it's going to come down to seeing what they can do for our secondary, right? Whether it's a combination of tight end, whether it's a combination of Barkley rushing the ball, putting them into the field as a catching option, or even their wide receiving core to kind of do what they do. As Paul says, I know it's different levels of play, but when I play passing teams that throw mid-level passes, I run the 4-4-3, take away the mid-level passes, right? And I think that for the most part, and I feel comfortable saying this, predominantly, if I look at the percentages, Washington runs a 4-2-5 defense. And only because we don't ever put 3 linebackers on the field at a time, predominantly. Sometimes we'll put a hybrid, especially like last year when we had Landon Collins to fill that role. But, it's super interesting that we put a lot of pressure and what's the word I'm looking for? Probably you know, I don't want to say anticipation, but expectations on the front four to make the difference when it's really the back 4 to 5 that are going to make that difference. I can have the front four rushing and, blitzing and stunting and doing everything all night long. And if you don't have the guys in the secondary to tighten up the coverage and not give up the big plays, then it doesn't look like the effort up front is even happening, let alone effective, right? And Paul's absolutely right that when you run that 4-2-5, it exposes your linebackers and exposes Cody with that 4-2-5, and it does the same thing with Davis. And while both of those guys are good linebackers, they're not the great to elite linebackers that we need, especially in that scheme. But when we go and draft two secondary guys in the first 2 rounds of the draft, and then go offense 3 and 5, offensive lineman 3-5, it definitely makes it a lot harder to kind of figure out where the roster holds come from. From an offensive perspective, I think we're gonna have to get more balanced in this game to have a chance to beat the New York Giants, right? What does that picture look like? It looks like more touches for the running backs. It looks like more touches for Brian Robinson. Even AG and even somewhat Chris Rodriguez is, as a third back, just to give that little spark, that little up-tempo different change maker to the run game. What's that going to do? That's going to open up the passing game for Sam Howell, and hopefully he can start getting the connection again with Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson didn't have very many looks in the last 2 weeks, and when he did, he's only getting like 4 or 5 looks a game. Unfortunately, he's been dropping like 2 a game, having 3, but nothing big yardage. Hasn't definitely had the chemistry and the connection that he had last year with Taylor Heineke, and then even in the end of the season with Sam Howell in Week 17 against Dallas, and even more recently at the beginning of the season with Sam Howell. Sam Howell's been spreading the ball around, which is really good and it's productive. However, it also doesn't allow guys to get into that rhythm, allow them to get into sync with the quarterback, get that relationship going. We talked about it week after week, especially at the beginning of the season and the preseason. There's only one football, and there's so many pairs of hands to get it to. Between the 5 or 6 wide receivers that he's been dumping the ball to, the 2 tight ends that he's been throwing the ball to, as well as the running backs out of the backfield. When you're only passing the ball 25 times a game, it only goes around so many times. If we can limit the turnovers, limit the sacks, because we know we're going to give them up, but if we can limit the sacks, limit the turnovers, and don't give up the big plays and the big yardage on defense, we definitely have a chance to win this game. I would like to think that we're going to win this game. However, it always jumps in the back of my head that this is the Giants. We always lose at least one of the 2 games to the Giants. The question is, are we going to lose at home, or are we going to lose this weekend at MetLife Stadium against the Giants? So I'd like to think that we're playing a little bit better ball right now, even as shitty as it is, than the Giants are. And that this past Sunday's game for the Giants was kind of just a fluke, right? Because the Bills were off. The Bills weren't playing top team, elite caliber football that the Buffalo Bills usually do. And having said all that, I think Washington pulls out the win. I think it's going to be relatively close. I think we're going to average, our 24, 27 points a game again. And, but unfortunately, I see the Giants putting up some points. So I think the Commanders are going to win this game, something to the tune of like 27-20. It's going to come down to, me holding my breath and about to have a coronary attack because the Commanders are trying to figure out how to lose the game in the last 2 minutes, but they end up pulling off the dub. Like I said, I'm feeling like a 27-20 victory against the Giants, take them to 1-6 and us 4-3, since we're sitting at 500 right now. So, it'll definitely be interesting to see what happens. Definitely be watching the game. The early line out, according to Out of the Box Sports Entertainment, is Commanders -2, over under is 39. So I could, like I said, I could definitely see. I would definitely take the over on the 39. Look, even if Danny Dimes isn't playing, the Giants can still put up some points, especially against us. And even if both teams scored 20, which is very easily capable in our matchup, that's over the 39. So it's just a matter of who you're going to take on the money line. Whether you're going to take the Commanders or whether you're going to take the New York Giants. So it'll definitely be a good fight. Definitely be a good game. Expect a full house. It's not too far from FedEx Field and DC Market, so you're going to see some Commander fans up there in the burgundy and gold. But before we go for the night and close off shop, we got a couple sponsors to hit up, as always. As Paul says in Out of the Box Sports, the tie is plus 8,000. You might have to hit one of those. I might even take that, right? But our first sponsor for the night is Monkey Cult Coffee. Monkey Cult Coffee has their newest blend, which is an organic blend, which is Peru La Florida. And you can also get the bourbon chocolate chip, the toasted coconut rum, and the Sumatran blend for all your coffee needs and that new organic flavor of Peru La Florida, along with your apparel, coffee cup accessories, and everything else. Go to Monkey Cult Coffee. Use promo code OOTB Sports for your discount and your order, and reach that all at monkeycultcoffee.com. All right, next up, Jason Fine, attorney Big Al. For all of your legal needs, specializing in motor vehicle accidents, slip and falls, workers' comp, personal injury claims, at 1-800-HURT-123. That's attorney Big Al, Jason Fine, with 3 office locations in Philadelphia, PA, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, PA. He's available to help you out no matter what your legal need is. Reach out to him at 1-800-HURT-123. That's Jason Fine, attorney Big Al. Last but not least, we have Dugout Mugs. We're hot into the MLB postseason run. And, as much as I hate to say it, the Phillies are looking pretty tough right now, along with those Texas Rangers. So get yourself a Dugout mug. Enjoy that fresh, cold beverage. They also made Dugout shot glasses as well. We use promo code OOTBSports20 for your 20% off at dugoutmugs.com. Get that Dugout mug. Enjoy that beverage during the game. Root on your favorite team or your arch nemesis. And remember to use the promo code OOTBSports20 at dugoutmugs.com. All right, as we wind up shop here tonight, as we went over a lot of things to try and recap, we recapped our less than exciting and even demoralizing loss to the Chicago Bears 2 weeks ago. We went and talked on, the recap of us going down to Atlanta and rebounding with a good win. Hey, Stacy, what's up? And, we also talked about the preview going into this week's big Giants game. And, it's definitely going to be something that we talk about between us and the Big Blue Power Hour between Stacy and Dan and Evan as well. Just that friendly interdivision rivalry. We still have one of the best divisions in NFL, top to bottom, between Philadelphia, Dallas, Washington, and the Giants. So it'll be interesting to see where we wind up. That, we always play each other hard. And whether we score a lot of points, score scale rain points, it's going to be a nail biter, I feel, down to the very end. But I definitely feel that, my team can overcome even the obstacles that we had last week on the win, kind of build on that as well, and kind of keep the train moving. Hopefully, that's what we need. Try to get that W. And last but not least, before we go, I'm just going to throw up our schedule here at Out of the Box Sports as we move through everything. There's a show for everybody. Just look and see what you're interested in. Mondays, we have the Joystick Junkies, the Sully Squad, the Cowboys pregame, Cowboys postgame this past Monday. Tonight, actually earlier today, we have the brand new show hosted by Dan, the Rangers on Ice, for all of you New York Ranger fans. Boo. I'm a Caps fan. And, of course, your Commanders GridIron is every Tuesday night at 6:30. Wednesdays, we got the Bat Cave. Extra innings this week is going to be Wednesday night, courtesy of the Phillies in the National Championship League Series. Jump on over on that, catch some baseball talk. Wednesdays also is College Football Frenzy with Paul and my buddy Bill Furman, followed by them 215 Boys, hosted by Paul and Dave. Sorry, Thursday is the weekly Pick'em show with Dan and Paul. No NFC East War Room this week. Friday is the Atomic Drop. Saturday, if you're the Notre Dame fans, we got the Golden Dome Hour at 11 and the Silver and Black Lair hosted by Ken at 10. And then, of course, Sunday, we got the Big Blue Power Hour at 11 a.m. Their new day, new time. We always got new shows coming on the Circuit platform here. You can follow us on Facebook, YouTube, X, and Twitch. Like, subscribe, your favorite show, as well as Out of the Box Sports Entertainment platform. Set your notifications so you know when your favorite show is coming. And as always, I greatly appreciate you all tuning in to Commander's Gridiron every week. Next week, we'll have more news on and off the field, all things concerning the Washington Commanders. With that, have a good night.